I want to go there now in terms of talking about the ERRO report that came out yesterday, which said 80,000 children were chronically absent in Term 2 this year, generally the worst of the 4 school terms in terms of attendance. And for Pacific students in Term 2, 17% were deemed chronically absent. Here for reactions to that and much more is Labour Deputy Leader Carmel Sepuloni. A very good morning to you.
Good morning.
Hey, look, pretty grim reading, to be honest, particularly for our Pacific students. What do you make of it?
It is concerning, and the reality is that attendance at school has been on decline for, I think, at least the last 16 years, obviously made worse by COVID. I was at the launch of the State of Pacific People's Report by the Salvation Army yesterday, and we had a discussion about the truancy issue here. We can't oversimplify this. Obviously, there are other factors involved. What we were discussing at that particular meeting was the fact that if you're in insecure housing, if you're transient, you're more likely to miss school. If your parents are living in poverty and they can't afford the bus fare or the petrol for the car, then you're more likely to miss school. And if these kids are living in houses that are cold and damp, they're more likely to get sick and miss school. So it's really important not to oversimplify it and to look at all of the contributing factors and for a government to address those rather than just come out heavy and say they're going to fine the parents.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. Look, to be devil's advocate though, I mean, do we need to be more frank and honest with our community to be like, look, and I fully concede that there are, issues going on in personal lives, but should we not be doing everything we can in our community to ensure that our children are educated properly?
Oh, absolutely. And so there is, of course, a level of responsibility for families, for communities, and also for government for the reasons that I highlighted earlier. A good case study that I heard this week when visiting, or last week when visiting Onehunga High School, is that they have improved their attendance dramatically. And speaking to the principal who's been there for 2 years, it is because they have taken this really proactive approach to contacting whānau. If the kids are not there, they ring. If the kids are falling behind in school early, they ring and they let them know the supports that are available and they encourage the parents and the families to get involved. Now, that's seen a massive turnaround in terms of attendance rates and also achievement for those kids. And so I think it is possible. It takes a lot of commitment from families, communities, schools and government.
I know you just characterised the measures being taken by this government as pretty heavy-handed. I'm paraphrasing here. But to their point, though, it feels as though because it has reached crisis point, do you not need to be heavy-handed with this?
Well, I think that you need to be honest about what the contributing factors are and then be proactive in addressing them. To come out heavy and say they're going to fine parents isn't necessarily the answer. You can imagine a whole lot of parents just accumulating debt as a result of that, which isn't necessarily going to help their situation anymore. And so you need to look at the full scope of reasons for why truancy is so high. Also, the government have said that focus is on those that are moderately absent, I think, as opposed to chronic. Well, those that are in chronic truancy situations have real lived experiences and challenges that also need to be addressed. But this government, I would say, is lazy with regards to getting to the root of the problem and actually proactively addressing those.
And to your point, I just want to, if we reflect back in your time in office as government, was the last government lazy when it came to truancy? I mean, did you do enough in that space?
Oh, we invested millions into more truancy officers, and we did that in accordance with what the schools said would work for them, having more in-house truancy of COVID. There was a lag effect and a slow recovery from that. That's to be expected. Whenever there's an economic event, whether it be GFC or any other that we have experienced, there's always a lag impact in terms of the issues that arise. Now, obviously, truancy wasn't necessarily one for GFC, but for all the reasons we know with COVID, It certainly was.
Yeah. Look, and good that you highlighted the Salvation Army State of Pacific Peoples report. I just want to get your reaction to it. I mean, look, again, it makes for grim reading, and I don't want someone listening this morning to be as if, I'm looking or seeking to beat down our community, but it's grim stuff. Reveals child poverty, housing affordability, educational achievements, still problems that are disproportionately affecting the community. What's your take on it?
Well, firstly, I just want to acknowledge Ana Ika, who pulled together this amazing report, and the Salvation Army, who do this work. And I don't think it should be underestimated how important it is. Holding governments to account, consecutive governments, being apolitical in that and not pointing the finger at one particular government, I think is integral for us understanding what's going on. It is concerning, the fact that the child poverty rates still disproportionately fall with our community and a range of other areas. What I think is important to note too, though, is where they do point out where progress has been made.
Yes.
And so increases in the numbers of Pacific people who have been employed. We saw a closing of the gaps there between Pacific and others in terms of the employment rate. We have seen teen pregnancies drop. We have seen youth suicide halve. And so, there are some important positives to take from this report. Now, in terms of the negatives, I would say that for me, it highlights the need to have a targeted approach. We can't keep doing this one-size-fits-all to policies and expect that communities like our Pacific communities will be well served, because clearly we can see that that is not the case. And so, alongside that, I'm worried about this government's agenda and the narrative around race-based funding and their desire to see any consideration for equity in the policies that they implement, because that will be at the detriment of our Pacific communities.
Sure, and in terms of the scope of this report, it is pretty wide-ranging in terms of the years that it looks at, but particularly it does take into account the time that Labour was in office. I mean, what do you think that says?
Well, it goes to show that you're not going to be able to achieve change in 1, 2, or even 3 terms. What we need is a consecutive governments to put an effort in to changing the statistics, to supporting our communities. I heard really clearly at the launch of this report yesterday that our communities want to be part of the solution. They don't want things done to them. They want to inform the policies that will work for them. And we know that when that happens, then it's effective. Unfortunately, we haven't got a government at the moment that seems to buy into that ethos.
Do you think Pacific people have now become the consequence of, say, Kiwi voters? They are the consequence of, what Kiwi voters chose at the last election?
Yeah, I do, sadly. There was a narrative put out by all of the 3 government parties that Labour had been biased in some ways towards Māori and Pacific communities. The government political parties ignored during the election campaign all of the evidence and the fact that we have poorer health outcomes, poorer educational outcomes, more likely to live in poverty, more likely to live in damp, unhealthy homes, and put out a narrative that was quite divisive with the general public. And so what we had was other communities feeling like they were threatened in some way or going to receive less assistance and less support because of the targeted, equitable focus that our government had. And that simply was not the case. New Zealand benefits overall when all communities are thriving. And so it is to the detriment of Aotearoa when we have a government who is divisive and refuses to acknowledge that that's the case.
For sure. Look, let's switch tack now to MSD, of course, yourself as a former Minister of Social Development. MSD analysed benefit data up to September 2023 and compared it to the previous year's forecast. Those already on a benefit were expected to get it for slightly shorter time, 13.4 years instead of 13.6 years. Now, this forecast was 10.7 years in 2017 when National was last in power. I mean, look, again, it kind of looks as though we're pretty dependent on the benefit.
Look, firstly, I just want to point out that I saw the Minister for Social Development's press release on this, and it was a reckless use of data. She hasn't spoken to the substance that's in the report. The report is really clear that there are risk factors that lead to people being dependent on welfare for a longer period of time. Many of those risk factors actually fall outside of the welfare system. Things like being in oranga tamariki care as children, having police proceedings served against someone or spending time in jail, living in social housing for 3 years previously, which, ultimately comes down to living in poverty
Sure.
for many of these families, and also having accessed mental health support or been hospitalised in the last 3 years. So those are the risk factors. The government shouldn't be taking a punitive approach off the back of that report towards beneficiaries. They should be actually working towards addressing the risk factors that cause people to stay on benefit for longer.
Do you believe in self-determination?
Yeah, absolutely. And I also believe that not all New Zealanders have access to the same opportunities as some others. I'll never forget when John Key visited my oldest son's high school, and he stood in front of the school and said that everyone has the same opportunities. And my kid came home and said, well, that's not the case, Mum. Well, a high school kid knew that. I certainly know that. And so you have to take into account the complex nature of people's lives and respond to those needs if you're going to be successful and get ahead.
Fully concede, and I understand what you're saying. Look, again, I'm wearing a devil's advocate here, and blast me for it. But look, in terms of, there are some, and we've had people on the show saying that perhaps we subscribe too much to victim mentality. What do you say to that kind of rhetoric?
No, I think that's rubbish, actually. And I think that all too often what we do is try and oversimplify serious issues. And then as a result, we come up with inadequate policy responses and solutions that never get us the results that we need as a country or that our families and communities need. And so, people genuinely live very complex lives. The one other thing I would say, Will, is that when reading this report, one of the things that's omitted or not taken into consideration when looking at the rates of long-term welfare dependency are the number of New Zealanders who have disabilities or ongoing health conditions.
Yep.
And for some of them, they will be on welfare for their whole lives because they are unable to work.
Yeah.
And for others of them, they will be in and out of work for all of their lives because it is difficult to get employment or to sustain employment. And so we have to be open-minded and we have to use the evidence in front of us before we speak and before we make policy decisions. Yeah. And I just don't think that this government is doing that.
Yeah, that's a good point that you mentioned there when it comes to those, of course, on a disability benefit. I do want to ask, though, what can be done? I mean, effectively, do you think it is right that there are those that are languishing on the benefit when ultimately they don't need to be?
Well, look, there's always going to be a handful, but I think even the Minister for Social Development has acknowledged in the past that they are a small group of New Zealanders. What is not helpful is when everyone who accesses a benefit is stigmatised as rorting the system or languishing on benefit or unwilling and, with no desire to work, because I can tell you the vast majority of people that are on benefit do want to work. I think one other point that the report doesn't really pick up on at all too is that there's a large number of New Zealanders, which includes many of ours, Will, who choose to work in seasonal work industries, whether it be the meat works or whether it be horticulture or any of those other areas that have seasonal work, who will, across the course of the year, inevitably go back on benefit, go into work, go back on benefit. Now, they are not doing a disservice to this country by taking up those jobs. Their rates of unemployment benefit are also taken into consideration, obviously, in this report, but there's no mention that actually many of them will be working for a big part of the year.
Yeah, certainly. Hey, look, let's end on a lighter note, and I showed you this off air. The book that I'm reading for the month is Dirty Politics. Of course, it's a classic as a political nerd myself. Do you remember, cast your mind back to that election period? How would you characterise that?
Oh, well, Dirty Politics, just as the title of the book says. And unfortunately, I feel like we're back in that space at the moment.
Yeah.
There are a lot of things happening, whether it be tax breaks for landlords in the tobacco industry, whether it be press releases that come out from the ACT Party where they're threatening the arts sector because our wonderful Tusiata Avia got the
That's right.
Senior Pacific Artist of the Year award, and they're threatening to take money away from CNZ. This is not the way New Zealand operates. We are internationally known for having a reputation for being transparent and for having very little, if any, corruption. But at the moment, I'm really questioning the integrity of this government and some of the decisions that they're making.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Hey, thank you so much for your time. That is Carmel Sepuloni, Labour Deputy Leader. You have a good rest of your day, eh?
You too. Thanks, Will.